Hello, everyone. Welcome back to ResearchWorks podcast here at EACD and IAACD in Heidelberg 2025. And with me now is one of our keynote speakers, all the way from South Africa, Professor Petrus De Vries. Have I said that correctly?
Sounds very good.
Yeah, it was okay.
Very good.
Gosh.
Well done.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the encouragement. Now, your keynote, great interest. Can't wait to delve into this. It is titled Family-Based Interventions for Autism, Lessons from Low and Middle Income Countries. I feel like a title is always so important, isn't it? It says it all.
Well,
What is the lesson? What are the lessons? Enlighten us, Petrus.
okay, so you want me to start with like the big picture message
Let's
first?
start big picture. Yeah.
Sure.
Then I like to funnel. Let's do the funnel.
So I think the very simple message that I will try to get across is, there's so much that is said and has been said about autism and diagnosis and treatment and intervention, etc. The key message I'm going to say is that there's really been a paradigm shift in autism intervention. And that paradigm shift is starting, but hasn't really happened across the globe.
Right.
And the paradigm shift has kind of two elements. The first element is that a lot of effort over the last number of decades have been spent on trying to think of interventions focused at the child.
Right.
So most of your listeners will know, all the sort of interventions that people have thought, what do I do with this kid?
Yeah.
And this, and then people start to think, well, what do we do in schools and in educational settings?
Right.
But all along, there's been a thread of the family.
Yes.
Every child with autism lives in the context of a family and in the context of a community.
Yeah.
And so that's the first element of this paradigm shift. The second element of the paradigm shift is we now have a group of evidence-informed interventions for autism, and we call them NDBI. And NDBI stands for Naturalistic Developmental Behavioral Interventions. NDBI.
Wonderful.
And so the N stands really for naturalistic, which means we do interventions in naturalistic context.
Right.
We reinforce and reward kids with the things they're interested in.
Right.
Not the old-fashioned kind of sweeties or, whatever. What they want.
Yeah.
The D stands for developmental. So all of us are at different developmental stages in whatever it is, whether it is language or communication
Beautiful.
or motor skills.
Yeah.
And so in this sort of approach, we make sure we know where you are, and then we think, how do I help you to the next step?
Right.
That's the developmental piece. The B is the behavioral, which is we use principles of behavioral analysis, understanding of behavior, what makes a behavior, how can we shape a behavior to be more functional, more appropriate to a context. And so together, there's a group of interventions we call NDBI.
That's beautiful.
So if I put the family together with the NDBI, what it means is the paradigm shift is this. We have moved away from a child receiving an intervention in a clinic room by a specialist, and that's moved right into the community.
Right.
Where in daily life, during everyday activities, we are going to support families to help their children learn to communicate and learn to learn.
Right.
And that's the paradigm shift.
That's beautiful. And you've obviously studied this as a topic of research. What are some of the outcomes that we're seeing? Because I can imagine some clinicians and specialists who are so used to that model of a child coming to see them in a clinic. You do your thing and then you say, goodbye, I'll see you next time.
Absolutely.
Convince them. What does this look like? Yeah.
Well, if we think for a moment just about the therapists, the interventionists, the clinicians, the practitioners, you're right. The model that we've all grown up with is I'm a specialist, I have expertise, I'm an OT, I'm a speech and language therapist, I'm a whatever sort of interventionist, and you come to me and I do my thing with you.
Yeah.
And in fact, in rich countries, we often have mums and dads drop the child while mum goes shopping or goes to her Pilates or whatever it might be. The child has her intervention.
Yes.
And then mum picks them up and they go home again.
Yes.
So that idea of something needs to be done to change the child.
Fix the child.
A model that we've really moved away from. And I think the whole neurodiversity principle that says we're all different, let's celebrate that, has helped with that, I think. So that is no longer the model. Number one, any specialist or therapist can really only spend, half an hour a week, an hour if you're lucky a week with a child. but they spend most of their day and most of their life at home in their community.
Yeah.
And that's where they need to learn, and that's where they need to communicate. That's why the challenge for our clinicians and practitioners is we now need to think, how can I use the knowledge and expertise I have to coach families and people in their own communities to do this
Beautiful.
thing?
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to be the therapist in your home.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you, as the mum or the dad, the knowledge, the expertise to help your child learn and communicate. And if I can do that, and when I can do that, because we know we can, you have every moment of the day as a learning opportunity for your child and with your child, both for them to learn and for you to learn how to help them learn. So I think the challenge for our therapists is we need to let go, and we need to change from being interventionists to being coaches of families and of people in the community.
Beautiful.
The learning for families is that you have knowledge and skills, and you have daily routines and opportunities in every moment of the day, waking up, brushing teeth, getting ready for school, going on the bus, going in the car, going shopping, cleaning up plates and dishes, whatever that might be, that you can help your autistic child learn to communicate and learn to learn.
Yeah.
And you have the skills, and we can help you learn a few extra simple tricks and techniques to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And often parents of autistic kids are a little bit scared. They think, well, I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
But you are an expert on your child, and on your community and on your environment.
Yeah.
And by helping you and empowering you with some of these things, that will really make a huge difference.
Beautiful.
That's where we want kids to do well. We don't want a child to do well in the clinic. We want them to do well in your home, in your community, during the activities that you would like them to participate in.
That's right. We have a very well-known saying within our own clinic itself, where we work with a lot of children, mostly with cerebral palsy, but we say you don't go to therapy to be good at therapy.
Exactly.
And we do need to shift that thinking, right?
Exactly.
We're thinking about life. What does life look like?
Absolutely.
And we're hearing more and more about that in the entire conference. You're probably hearing the common threads, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It is the role of others, and the specialty of clinicians and therapists are still there, but it's being delivered in a different way, but in a way that hopefully is more sustainable from a cost perspective, time perspective, just resource. And that comes from our learnings from low and middle income countries, because you tend to be more creative, don't you? You look for solutions.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful segue into the kind of the lessons of my keynote, which is very much about lessons from low resource context. I work in Africa. We have over 1 billion people. Half of Africa is a child.
Wow.
And the UN forecasts that by 2050, 40% of the world's children will live in Africa.
Wow.
Or 0%. And yet we have almost no experts. In the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, there's something like 60 or 70 child psychiatrists, just to give you an example. In my country,
actually hard to wrap your head around.
The city of Stockholm has more child and adolescent psychiatrists than all of sub-Saharan Africa. Okay? Let's take developmental pediatricians. I'm just using a few examples.
Yeah, great examples.
In all of South Africa, I think we have 15 developmental pediatricians, right?
Really?
And most other African countries don't have any. Many African countries don't have clinical psychologists. So for people from outside low and middle income context, your mind, you might think, how do I imagine that even? But that's the reality.
That's the reality.
Of low and middle income countries.
That's the context.
95% of autistic children live in low and middle income countries. Only 5% are in rich countries. And what that means is we have to think differently about how are we going to get to the children and the families, and therefore who's going to help us with this business. And so you can see how the whole paradigm shift towards naturalistic developmental behavioral approaches in the family home, it not just makes sense, but it's also the only thing we have.
Yes.
The handful of specialists we have and that we are.
Yes.
We can't say, I will work with 100 children a year when there's 1 million waiting
and
receiving nothing.
Yeah.
So that's why in our context, we've done it I always say we innovate not because it's a cool thing to do, but because we have nothing else to do.
That's right.
It's the only option that we have in my context. And so what I will talk about also in my keynote is just a few examples of how we have therefore tried to say what we need are, I call them kind of pyramids of intervention. So at the ground, at the bottom, everyone should have access to some basic intervention, some basic knowledge, support, parent or caregiver training, etc. And then most might need a little bit more. Some might need something that's more specialist or more intensive, and only a tiny proportion, at the top of that pyramid should have real, one-to-one, highly specialist intervention.
Yeah.
At the moment, if we look at the world, most of those interventions are at the top of that pyramid and not down at that bottom.
And as you say that, I can't help but to say that health equity is an issue for everyone.
Of course.
Because even if you come from a country, so for example, in Australia, we have this incredible system. It's not perfect, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and it provides funding. And a big issue is always about how much is put toward it. And the budget is constantly being blown out, and it's not sustainable. And if we're thinking about health equity, we have to be making sure that we're not trying to, the model should be about how we optimize opportunities for everyone. And that one-to-one model isn't always going to be the way it can be delivered if we're thinking about time and resources. That is a responsibility for every single one of us. Because even if you're not worried about money, say, time is a precious commodity, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely. And regardless of where you are in the world, there's always a finite pot of money.
That's right.
And finite expertise. So,
that's right.
So I do. I mean, it's not that I'm trying to sell what we're learning in lower middle income countries, but I think there are lessons we're learning.
Absolutely.
Because we have to, that are equally powerful in high income contexts. So for example, one of the lessons we learned is we need to think how we can do task sharing with non-specialists.
Beautiful.
Okay? And by task sharing, I mean, how can I, as a very expert person, if you imagine that pyramid, I'm at the top of the pyramid in maybe a specialist center, a national center, a university hospital, whatever. How can I train people who are at a lower level of expertise? I mean, it's all relative. I don't want to insult anyone's level of expertise.
Yeah, of course, yes.
How can I train somebody who might work in a district setting or might not be quite a super expert to deliver some of those interventions to a good standard in a broader footprint?
Sure.
And how can they support people who have even less expertise and specialisms than they are, perhaps in a very community-based setting? Because by doing that kind of task sharing, every step we can do it, we are increasing the footprint of reach to our communities.
And that brings me to a point of thinking, we love talking about, in my field, we love talking about active ingredients. What are the key things that make all the difference? And research has come to a place now where we can identify a lot of them, which is how you've come up with what you've said as well. And if we know what they are, we can teach them to people. We can be quite specific about what it means, doesn't it? Otherwise, it's kind of like we don't have recommendations to make. And that's why we must be evidence-based, because we've identified the key ingredients.
I agree. Yeah. And we do have an evidence base. Yeah. We can be evidence informed.
Yes.
And active ingredients, you're absolutely right, in autism intervention are there.
Yeah.
The task then, the challenge for us, and it's a creative task as well, is how do we make those active ingredients as clear and as simple as possible that we can train them across all levels of expertise.
And it's the art of great communication, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the answer is we can. And what I'm going to do in my keynote is just tell two stories about how we've actually worked with the World Health Organization on what's known as the Caregiver Skills Training Program, WHO CST. The CST is a group-based support program for families who have a child with developmental concerns. Right. They don't need a diagnosis.
Yeah, okay.
And it's 9 sessions of groups that focuses on all elements of the NDBIs that I mentioned earlier, naturalistic developmental behavioral approaches, where we're giving families knowledge, skills, expertise, and we're also empowering them, therefore, to use that. what we did in South Africa is we had to think, okay, who are the right people that we can train to deliver this?
Sure.
And we had a beautiful project with our National Department of Social Development because government had to sign up to this thing. That's a strategic decision. We worked with Autism South Africa, who's the national non-profit organization for autism in the country, and my team at the Centre for Autism Research in Africa at the University of Cape Town with an academic partner. So
Right, okay.
the three, a kind of a government, non-profit, academic partnership.
Yeah.
And we decided that we want other mums and dads and people who have lived expertise with autism to be the facilitators of this program.
Wonderful.
And so in Autism South Africa, they call them regional development officers. They are mums of autistic family members.
Yeah.
And after first engaging with all stakeholder groups for a period of time, adapting the course and the materials to an African and a South African context, we trained these mums to deliver the intervention.
Smart.
And the outcomes were amazing. Number one, it's a group-based program. So talking about active ingredients.
Yeah.
One, if not the most powerful active ingredient, is bringing mums and families and grannies and aunties and dads and uncles who think that I'm the only one who's living this road, who's walking this walk with autism and with a disability. We're connecting them to other people who are on the same journey.
Yeah, we know that's important.
So
it's powerful. Yeah.
And they form WhatsApp groups and they connect.
Beautiful.
And they build relationships.
Yeah.
Long
Share
beyond
strategies and learnings. And
long beyond the 12-week or 9-week program that we deliver. Number two, we've also seen how, firstly, the facilitators, but also then the mums and the families who come to the program, how they become empowered. And I mean, in one of our communities, a group of mums said, we're going to organize an autism awareness event.
Beautiful.
And they organized a march.
Great.
At another event, they contacted the South African Broadcasting Company. They got the national TV to come and record their graduation ceremony and be interviewed.
So fabulous.
That's community empowerment.
Absolutely. Power of people.
And that happened because we worked with and we decided to work with mums. And we've shown, we have nice work that shows they can do it, they can deliver it as well as anybody needs to. It's a highly manualized program. They can do it to fidelity. So, and what's happened since then, this program is now being rolled out in all the provinces of South Africa because of that initial partnership with the government and the nonprofit and the academic partnership.
Fantastic.
So that's powerful. That's if we really think about how do we do research that will transform communities, that's what we want, and that's where we want to go. It's not about the papers I write. It's not about the grants I write. It's about the impact on real people in the real world.
Yeah. And it's developing those solutions. It's going away from the now that we've done the work to identify those active ingredients, it's really developing a model within the context that is the most important. And then reporting on those outcomes.
Correct.
It's the other way around, isn't it?
Yeah. And another message I'll give in my keynote also is it was actually quite amusing when I first came back to South Africa. So as I said, I was born and trained in medicine in South Africa. Then I moved to the UK where I trained in psychiatry, child psychiatry, and did a PhD at the University of Cambridge. And then I lived and worked in the UK for a long time.
Right.
When I went back to South Africa, people then said to me, okay, so what's the best program that we should implement in South Africa? The government and other governments from other countries would say to me, so you have expertise in this. What program should we buy? Like that. And the very simple message, and I'm sorry if I'm going to disappoint people, is there will never be one program for all autistic children in all contexts.
Yeah.
So our job is to think what's the most appropriate program or programs in our context for our people with our resources.
Yeah.
And that
wonderful.
might look different depending on where we are.
And that's okay. And that's okay.
And in fact, that's the right thing.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. The other story I'm going to tell is, so this first story is about for kids with disabilities. They don't have a diagnosis. And the reason that was important to us is there's such a barrier to getting a diagnosis. In my country, and in fact, I hear this in many countries around the world, mums are worried about their kids when they're 2. They're not speaking, they're not communicating, they're not engaging with other kids. 2 is the typical age.
Right.
And many of them then wait until the children are 5 or 7 before they actually get a formal diagnosis. And that window is a lost opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's why we wanted a program that if you are worried, there should be something that you can do.
Yeah.
And there should be a program that you can engage with. So
That's
a kind of a, regardless of diagnosis.
Yes.
The second story is about once you now have a diagnosis of autism, what can we do to give you autism-specific knowledge and skills and support?
Yeah.
And so that's, again, back to naturalistic developmental behavioral interventions. There's one of those models that's called the Early Start Denver model. You might have heard of ESDM,
Yes.
Developed by American colleagues of ours. And we had the opportunity to think, is there a way that we can adapt ESDM or adjust it or use the active ingredients, as you talked about earlier, of ESDM to work in a South African or in an African context? And so the question there was, so who might be the partners? Who might be our implementation partner to work with?
Yeah.
Because it can't be highly specialist psychologists and occupational therapists. We don't have them.
Not enough of them.
We don't have enough of them at all. And as you've said, nobody has enough of them.
Yeah.
And so after a long, I mean, if people are interested, you can go and read some of our publications. It always sounds so nice and easy when we talk on these kind of podcasts. But actually, it was like 7 years of work to get to that
Of course, yeah.
realization.
To summarize anything into one line takes a decade at least, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it was probably 10 years from starting to getting to the point of saying, even young children engage with the school system quite early on. And in our South African school system, we had or have a non-specialist group called Early Child Development Workers, ECD workers.
Okay, yes.
They're relatively low skilled, so they have like a 1-year post-high school education, and they support typically the preschoolers who might, be in typical ECD centers, early child development centers, but they might also be the first port of call for kids who have some developmental concerns. And to make a 10-year story in one sentence, we adapted the ESDM program to be delivered by ECD workers. And we call it a cascaded task sharing. You remember we talked about task sharing. So we have Lauren France, who's a kind of master trainer in Duke University in the USA. She trained 3 of my team, an occupational therapist and 2 psychologists. They then trained and coach and supervise the early child development workers who coach mums or any family member to work with their child in the home.
Right.
So that's the model. 12 sessions, very manualized, but supported by supervisors.
Beautiful.
And in the pilot study, we showed, number 1, these ECD workers can deliver the intervention to fidelity, in other words, to the standard that we expect. Number 2, mums and dads and uncles and aunties and grannies can learn to coach, to work with their kids to fidelity, to the standard that we expect. And number 3, we could see signals of change in communication and in learning in the children who were accessing this program.
That's fantastic.
And so we're now in the middle of a randomized controlled trial in our South African school system, working with the ECD workers using that model. But you can imagine, if you're from a different part of the world, that's the kind of models that I think we could use to scale up
100%
intervention.
Yes.
So it's not about, I'm not here to sell a particular program, but the concept of why all of us really need to think, how do we scale up? Because that's, you used the word earlier, sustainability and scalability of interventions. And that's a challenge that we really haven't resolved in autism in the real world. And so I think that's an opportunity for all of us in research to think, how can we, I'm looking at your sign that says the Research Works podcast, how can we make research work in the real world?
Yeah. The whole idea, the passion. It's why we do research, right? Not
so
for
that, in a nutshell, is my keynote. And I hope people will hear things. We all come from different places with different lenses. So I hope people will find that interesting and hopefully a little bit
did. That was fantastic.
Exciting.
It is inspiring, actually. And I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to break that down for us and to talk through some real issues that are actually relevant for all of us, no matter what context we're in, because we all have a responsibility to use our limited resources ethically.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't matter where you are. It's a very real thing. So thank you for sharing this at the keynote here. and for speaking with me today, Petrus.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, all of our listeners. I hope you really enjoyed that. Hope that inspired you as much as it did for me. Stay tuned, though. There's so much more to come. We'll talk to you all again really soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.